That's my version of a drum roll. So this is the last plant section you will do of your entire life sciences career in school, unless you go forward and study science at university, then you might do some plants. But this plant section isn't like any other, thank goodness. It's actually quite interesting, and it's asked in a very similar way every year. So we were asked, or it was suggested, that we include a video of ourselves teaching. But the thing is, I want you to watch the screen, not me talking in the corner of the screen, because that's not what's important. So for the personal touch, I added a little photo of where I'm sitting right now. There's Caper stretching next to me, of the cutest dog in the world. But yeah, that's me. There's my leg. So just so you know, it's me. Hello. So there's your personal touch. So we're starting off by looking at what are plant growth substances, and we call them hormones, but sort of in inverted commas, because they're not really hormones because they don't travel in blood. So hormones have to travel in blood, like in the human body, but these are just plant growth substances. And the three examples we look at are Auxins, Gibberellins, and Abscisic Acid. So you must know all of the functions of Auxins, Gibberellins, and Abscisic Acid, because it can be asked in a multiple choice question, or just give three functions. So the big functions of auxins are the tropisms, the bending reactions that occur in plants, and we'll focus a fair amount on that today. It also promotes cell division, so makes cells grow and divide quicker, responsible for cell enlargement. So those two are tied together because they actually link quite nicely to our tropisms, because a plant can't bend without cells dividing and growing or getting bigger. So those three go quite nicely together. This apical dominance, you might remember the apical bud from grade 10. The apical bud is the part of the plant that is responsible for the upward growth. It's found at the tip of the stem or at the tip of a root, and it's responsible for the growth in height of a plant. So the auxins will promote vertical growth and inhibit the growth of lateral branches, which is why if you have someone in your family who is into gardening, if you don't prune your rose bush, for example, so when I say prune, you normally cut off the tallest part of the plant. You cut off that apical bud. So you remove all of those auxins, which means your rose bush can then grow outwards and produce a lot of roses. I'm not a good gardener, so when I have had a rose growing, I normally get one ginormous rose at the top of the plant, and then it's actually too heavy to even be supported by the plant, and then it dies. So that's what we do by pruning plants. We remove apical dominance. So we cut off the top of the plant, which will then allow lateral branches to grow, because you have removed those auxins that are found at the top of the stem or the shoot. So if the apical bud is removed, apical dominance is removed, so growth of lateral branches is promoted. The last thing is it promotes root development, so meaning it allows the roots to grow deeper, which is obviously, again, beneficial. Functions of gibberellins, one of those words you want to say out loud, but the slower you say it, the harder it sounds, like gibberellins, but I just say gibberellins because that's how it sounds. So it promotes the elongation of the internodes of stems. So if I draw a quick stem here, so there's a stem, there's a lateral branch coming off, there's a lateral branch. That's a node and that's a node. So let me color it in blue here. There's a node and there's a node. They're like little bumps on a stem. If you go look out at a plant like a rose in your garden, or even a restio, like one of those big bushy fynbos-like plants, you will see these bumps all the way down the stems. This section here is the internode, the red section. That is the internode. So it doesn't make the plant grow higher from the top. It makes the plant grow taller from between the branches. It also helps with the auxins to stimulate root growth. I normally tie these next to you together, so it promotes development of flowers and increases fruit size, because flowers and fruit kind of go together. It appears to promote the sprouting of buds, so like a flower bud. So that also goes together, development of flowers, sprouting of a bud, and it helps in the germination of seeds. So it helps seeds to start growing. Our last growth substance is abscisic acid. yeah, again, we're just going to learn some of these functions. It brings about the dormancy of seeds, so it works opposite to gibberellins. And it also slows down or causes the dormancy of apical buds. So that's how it works in opposition to auxins, because auxins want apical buds to be growing more. Abscisic acid makes those apical buds. Remember, the apical bud is at the top of the plant. So here's a little flower, and the apical bud, so I'm just going to draw it like that. This would be the apical bud over at the top there. Apical bud is at the top of a plant. It induces flowering in some plants, so stimulates the development of the flowers. That helps the gibberellins. It helps closing the stomata during periods of water shortage or drought, and promotes the aging of leaves. Now that is what you need to be, where you need to be thinking of autumn. So when your leaves go brown and start to fall, that is as a result of abscisic acid. Now we're going to look at the whole crux of this section. And these are the phototropism and geotropism processes. So very important, these are controlled by auxins. That's an ugly color highlighter. I'm going to undo that. These are controlled by auxins, and you must always say auxins are plant growth substances produced at the tips of roots and shoots. Shoots are stems pretty much. But you must always say where auxins are produced in a plant. Always. Even if it's not a possible mark on that memo, it very likely would be on the next one. The most common auxin name that you could be asked, indole acetic acid, IAA, or if you ever asked what causes the tropism or the phototropism, you can actually use indole acetic acid or IAA as your answer, because it is an example of an auxin. So, like I said, auxins bring out tropisms, which are called bending reactions. Please note that there is no H over here. They're not trophisms. People want to say trophisms because you think or trophic levels and that kind of thing. But it's a tropism. You must say that word out loud so that you can remember there's no H there. So tropism, there I go, put an H. Tropisms are growth movements or bending reactions of a plant in response to an external stimulus. Now, there are two stimuli that we can deal with. We have the stimulus of light and the stimulus of gravity. If the bending reaction is in response to light, we call it a phototropism. If it is in response to gravity, we call it a geotropism. So we look at stems of a plant, so everything that's above ground, being positively phototropic, meaning they grow towards the light, obviously because they want the branches to be near the sunlight. And the stems are negatively geotropic, meaning they grow against gravity because they're growing upwards. Roots, on the other hand, it's the opposite. Roots are negatively phototropic because they're growing away from the light, because they're growing downward. The sun is up, they're growing in the opposite direction, but they are positively geotropic. They're growing with gravity, so they're being pulled downwards. Okay, so this picture here just shows what geotropism looks like. It normally means we've put a plant on its side somehow. Because otherwise, if we just have a plant standing up, then we'd see the stems growing higher and the roots growing lower, which doesn't really prove anything. So if you lie it on its side, you'll see the stem starts to curve upwards. Number one, because it's growing against gravity, because it is negatively geotropic, and because we can assume the sun is up here, it would be growing towards the light. So it's positively phototropic. Whereas the roots, on the other hand, start to curve downwards, so they are positively geotropic. They're growing down with gravity, and ideally, if the light is up here, they're growing away from the light because roots are negatively phototropic. This is going to be one of those slides you're just going to have to memorize, because if you look at your guidelines, you will see that the role of auxins in phototropism and geotropism, for that matter, are pretty much identical to the way it's stated here, and it's often a 5-mark question. So here we're stating Where are auxins produced? They are produced at the tip of the stem. So here we're only talking about the stem. If it was a question involving the root as well, you would say and the root, but you wouldn't lose a mark if you added in there and the root. So auxins are produced at the tip of the stem where they move downwards evenly. So they spread out, and that even distribution of auxins brings about equal growth on all sides of the stem. So we're talking about a stem that is obviously having cell elongation and lots of cell division because of the auxins. Remember, that's one of the functions of auxins. So if there's even distribution of auxins, there's even cell enlargement or getting bigger, and there's even cell division, which causes growth. So it's even growth. Therefore, the stem will grow upwards. But normally, this is where you'll start looking at what happened in the experiment. So when stems are exposed to unilateral light, that's a very important word there, because another word you can get sometimes is uniform light. Uniform light means it's equal on all sides. Unilateral means it's coming from one side only. So it's being exposed to uneven light. That means that the brightly lit sides will suffer from a shortage of auxins. Now, we don't know why. It's very likely because auxins are destroyed by the light, or they move away from the light, so they move to the darker side of the plant. Either of those are acceptable things to include in your answer. I would include both. Now, this is a very key point here. I'm going to highlight it in a different color. A high concentration of auxins in stems promotes growth. You'll understand why I emphasize that now, because in roots it's actually the opposite. So therefore, an uneven distribution of auxins causes an uneven growth. Because if we had a plant stem over here, I will do an example of this with you, and then we end up with more auxins on the one side because we have some light over here. So we can see the auxins moved across. That means that this side, the left-hand side, because it has a higher concentration of auxins, will have more cell growth. So this side will grow quicker, and the side on the right will grow slower, which means you'll see the plant starting to bend towards the light. So here, the uneven distribution of auxins causes uneven growth, with the darker side growing faster because auxins promote cell growth and division. Therefore, the stem bends towards the light, which is why stems are positively phototropic. If I gave you this experiment as an example, what you can see is that the plant not only grows taller, but it also grows sideways to the right. So in picture 1, we have uniform light, meaning the light is not coming from one particular side, it's directly above the plant. So all sides of the plant will be exposed to sunlight evenly. So this is where we start with our answer. We say auxins are produced at the tip of the stem and they move downwards evenly, which means the stem experiences even growth. In the next picture, you have unilateral light. You can see it is on the right-hand side of the plant. So what happens is that unilateral light causes auxins to move to the dark side of the stem. Or you can say the unilateral light kills some of the auxins on the light side of the stem. But again here, just want to reiterate, we have unilateral light versus uniform light in the first picture. Do not get confused, because if I give you an experiment where I say the plant was exposed to uniform light, you know that that plant is not going to undergo phototropism, because phototropism is only in the presence of unilateral light, not uniform light. So we have that very important point that we have to say, a high concentration of auxins in stems promotes growth. So we see the darker side, because it has more auxins on it over this side, will show more cell elongation and division, because that's what auxins cause. Therefore, the darker side grows faster. And the last point is that we say, therefore, the stem bends towards the light, which you can see even in the previous picture. But that is your final point of explain what you see in these pictures below. You have to say all of those points for a 5-mark question. You will see now, when we're looking at geotropism, again, caused by auxins, that a lot of the statements are quite similar. We're kind of just saying like slightly nuanced differences. So here we say auxins are produced at the tip of a root. Remember, I say you always say where the auxins are produced. And here they move upwards evenly, whereas in phototropism they produce the tip of a stem and they move downwards evenly. And then we say again, even distribution means equal growth on all sides of the root, so the root will grow straight downwards. When a root is placed horizontally, like I said, you lie a plant on its sides, the auxins accumulate on the lower side, probably due to gravity, meaning if you have a root, I'm going to draw it over here, you will end up with a large amount of auxins on the lower side of this root, because they probably have sunken downwards, whereas with phototropism, auxins move away from the light side. Here they sink to the lower side of the root due to gravity. And then this point is very important because it's different to stems. A high concentration of auxins in roots inhibits growth. But like I said, this is in roots. In stems, a high concentration promotes growth. So there's a very important discrepancy there between auxins in roots and stems. A high concentration of auxins in roots inhibits growth. So we can see that this side, the lower side of the root, is going to grow slower because it has more auxins than the top side. And then we say the same story, an uneven distribution of auxins causes uneven growth of the root, with the upper sides growing faster, or you could say with the lower sides growing slower. Therefore, the root bends downwards, i.e., roots are positively geotropic. So like I said, this bottom side will grow slowly, so it'll be growing like little bit. This top side is like shooting out new cells and bigger cells. So that causes that side to grow faster, which causes the downwards bending of a root. So when you're looking through your questions that I've posted on the classroom, you must read the blurb very, very carefully. So if I'm just looking at question 3.1, the diagram below represents a germinating seed. Assume that the radicle, which is the young root, and the plumule, the young stem, were exposed to uniform light from all directions. That means that is going to be an example of a geotropism or geotropic reaction, because unilateral light is phototropism. So don't rush into the questions. Look at the picture, look at the information that's given you, and write little sketches write little words about what is happening in the picture, because you need to understand what type of tropism are you going to talk about. So good luck with those questions. Try watch the video again, but I think it's quite clearly explained, but the more questions you do, the better it is going to be for you. And the last thing about doing the questions is you might get questions where they say the apical bud was removed. Now remember that auxins are responsible for apical dominance, because auxins in the apical bud promote vertical growth. If you remove this apical bud, will vertical growth occur? No. So if the apical bud is removed, apical dominance is removed. So the growth of lateral branches is promoted. So there is a question that talks about lateral branches growing, or the plant gets wider. So that isn't testing a phototropism or a geotropism reaction. It is testing apical dominance. That's the other thing that you can be asked to prove in an experiment.